Welcome to the podcast today, book nerds. Today I'm extremely excited and super honored to be talking to today's guests. We are joined by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson are back with the newest installment in the universe started by Frank Herbert, with Sands of Dune, on sale June 28th from Tor Books. Sands of Dune collects 3 previously unpublished novellas that shine a light upon the darker corners of the universe, making it absolutely essential reading for die-hard spice fanatics. The stories in Sands of Dune traverse the worlds and lives we've all come to love, from detailing Gurney Halleck's time working in the underground smuggling networks on Arrakis, to the innermost ranks of Sardaukar and the Emperor's fighters, to Shadut Mapes' early life as a firebrand freeman under the rule of the Harkonnens. One thing is clear, Dune continues to shape science fiction as we know it. And I know you guys are extremely excited, I'm super excited, so without further ado, let's get into the interview. All right, book nerds, welcome to the podcast today. I'm joined by 2 very important guests. We have Kevin J. Anderson and we have Brian Herbert joining us today on the podcast. Welcome, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor to have you both here on the podcast today.
Hello, Mary.
Hello. Thanks.
Absolutely. And I know you guys are both famous. You've been in the publishing industry for years now. Can you both introduce yourselves? You can start, whoever wants to go first.
Brian, you go ahead. You're first.
Okay, I'm Brian Herbert. I've been writing since I was 8 years old. There was a big gap until I was about 33 before I published anything, but I've been busy ever since.
And I'm Kevin J. Anderson, and in addition to all the books that Brian and I have written together, what's our total, Brian? 21?
Around 21, yeah. We have about 200, we have more than 200 books published between us, maybe 250, I don't know.
Yeah, so we're both busy, and in addition to the Dune stuff I do with Brian, I've also written with some steampunk books with Neil Peart, the drummer from Rush, and I've done X-Files and Star Wars and comics. And so anyway, we're nerds too, so we belong in this podcast.
Awesome. Perfect. Definitely. And I know a lot of people are going to be so happy to have you guys here because you're both currently working on, we've heard, The Sands of Dune coming out on June 28th. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes, that's the right date.
Awesome. And I want to ask you guys, how long have you known each other? Even was it before you started writing, or did you get to know each other after you got into writing?
Well, Kevin had the audacity to think he could write Dune books, and he was actually right. I got a letter from Kevin early in 1997 suggesting that we write some Dune books together, and he pointed out that there were some stories to be told. So that's 1997. I didn't answer the letter for several months because I had to do some checking up on him. I did not hire an investigator, but I talked to everybody I knew in the science fiction and fantasy community, and I got nothing but accolades for Kevin. But more importantly, once we started talking, I think around April or May of that year, we hit it off. And then we found not only from a personality standpoint do we hit it off, but we could write together, we could brainstorm together, we could get along, move our egos aside. So it's been a very good relationship for, as Kevin said, about 20 books. 3 of those are Hellhole series that we wrote together, and the other 16 or 17 are Dune series novels and short stories.
Well, and I was a huge Dune fan since the time I was like 10 or 11 when I first read Frank Herbert's Dune, and I just loved it. And then as I grew up, I read Dune Messiah and Children of Dune and read the entire series. And for any Dune fans who read Frank's original books, the very last one, Chapter House Dune, just like ends on a huge cliffhanger. The story's not done, and the characters are trapped in the middle of a giant desperate situation. And then Frank Herbert had passed away, and I don't remember what it was, Brian. It was okay. So 90. It was probably like 12 years or so after Frank Herbert's passing that I was just so impatient as a Dune fan. I contacted Brian to see if he had any plans of finishing it, or if he hadn't, that we could maybe work together on it because Frank Herbert left just such huge shoes to fill, and we put our two big feet in them and, and tried to fill them. So,
well, after 25 years, that proves Kevin's memory is pretty good. It was 11 years, but 12 is good. That's close.
good.
We then proceeded to find some notes of the unwritten Dune book that Dad had left really unstarted. He'd done some notes and outlines and character analyses. We found those notes in two safety deposit boxes. And it's a story that it's truth is stranger than fiction. We pulled the two notes out. I had an NSA, an ex-NSA security crypto analyst go through all the things we found from a computer standpoint in the boxes, and we found incredibly Frank Herbert's Dune 7 notes. We verified through several ways that was all there was, and it was around 30 pages. So it was from that 30 pages that Kevin and I then started searching through files that I had. Kevin came over. We found more than 1,000 pages of Frank Herbert's notes about Dune, a lot of it unpublished. And we were just blessed to have not only the outline, but all this other material and to be able to work together.
Well, and it was not just all of those working notes, but there is a huge Frank Herbert archive of all of his notes and manuscripts and drafts and things. And I spent a lot of time digging through all of that, which is, all open and available. And we published a lot of these notes in our book called The Road to Dune. We had a whole bunch of them up on the old version of the Dune website. So they're out there. We've had a couple of conspiracy theory people saying that we're making it all up, but there's thousands of pages out there. So well, they can have their conspiracies if they want. But
and for about a year before we even wrote a word, I put together a 600-page single-spaced Dune concordance that's unpublished, but it's all of Frank Herbert's 6 Dune novels, showing the colors of the characters' eyes, their hair, what they look like, what their motivations were, the settings that Frank Herbert wrote about in all 6 books. We're not publishing it yet because, as Kevin said, the fans will find something that we made a mistake on. They'll use the book against us. Just kidding. But we now have an even bigger potential concordance, which would be fun to do someday. But we're just not ready to do that.
But what a huge task. I mean, there's millions and millions of Dune fiction to be pulling together. But we talk about all the notes and the stuff that Frank Herbert left behind. But Brian and I also, when we're working together, we like to call it like a jazz performance. That we're just two performers and we're riffing off of each other and building up each other's melodies, and it's just so much fun.
That was riffing, not ripping.
That's good. Not ripping, it was riffing, the jazz term. And we've just we've done so much work over so many years that we've really built upon not just Frank's notes, but on our own stuff now, because we have such a backlist of our own things to be working on. It's kind of like when you were working on, if you were working on the original Captain Kirk Star Trek, you only had those episodes, but now there's all of these other Star Trek episodes to build on that it's hard to keep track of it all. But we've got a new trilogy that's kind of going right now that began with the Duke of Caladan and the Lady of Caladan, and the grand finale called The Heir of Caladan, like H-E-I-R, will be out in I think October. And as we're talking before, we have this collection of novellas, little shorter stories that fit in different pieces, and that's called Sands of Dune, which comes out in July. So we have lots more ideas, and it's a huge universe with I don't know what it is, Brian, 16,000 years worth of history and thousands of planets, and there's
it's more than 20,000 years of history. And Kevin and I believe, have written around 2 million words in the series, and Frank Herbert wrote 1 million in the 6 books, and he did not have a computer. But Kevin and I are not quite as smart as Frank Herbert was, but so Kevin steps into one of his boots and I step into another one. And the two of us together can do a pretty good job. But that's 3 million words that have been published in the Dune universe. And I think Sands of Dune, when you add that to Tales of Dune, that's the second collection of short stories. And the fans really like the short story collections.
Yeah, well, the thing with Sands of Dune is we write these giant 600-page books with multiple storylines and 100 chapters and things, but there are times when you just have like this one really cool idea that it really only takes a short story to explore that, and it's fun to take a smaller idea and just run with it rather than having to write these enormous tomes. So we enjoyed writing the shorter versions of how about if we tell the background of this obscure character that's kind of interesting, and that's what the Sands of Dune is.
And some of those short stories have been fleshed out by Dune. I mean by Boom Comics. So we have 8 comic issues covering 3 short stories. So that's fun to see that on the page too.
Well, and that's something that is kind of new for us in the past few years. So I've worked in comics over the years from Dark Horse and Marvel and DC, but we also just did the very detailed scene by scene graphic novel adaptation of Frank Herbert's original Dune, and Abrams Books published that. The first volume came out I think a year and a half ago, and the second one's coming out this August, and we've already delivered the script for the third one because Frank's novel is broken up into 3 parts. So we're doing 3 very detailed graphic novels, and just bringing the Dune universe to a comic audience is really exciting. And then Boom Studios, another comic book publisher, for them, we adapted our novel House Atreides into a 12-issue series, as well as some of the short stories like Brian just mentioned. So there's a lot of great ways to enter into the Dune universe.
That's absolutely incredible. You guys are just an inspiration, I feel like. It's insane the amount of work that you've gone through and just picking up right where Frank Herbert left off. And that in itself, honestly, to me, just sounds like it could be a novel about you guys just even finding the story and just continuing on from there.
Well,
it's quite a story.
A comedy caper about the two of us doing something, maybe, but
no, I think my mother, I wrote in Dreamer of Dune, the biography I wrote of my dad, that my mother had paranormal abilities, and I feel that she directed us, to the safety deposit boxes after 11 years, that nobody knew were even there. She directed me to the notes. So my mother has been approving of this process, and she passed away in 1984, and my dad passed away in 1986. And then we found these notes in 1997. Didn't even know they existed.
Wow.
So it's been pretty incredible. And you're right, Mary. There's a story to be written there. Another Dune-related story, Kevin.
Okay.
Yet another story you guys can add under your belt of host of projects.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I know that you guys mentioned the comic adaptation. What's it like working with artists and things like that to not only put words on the page, but to actually put a visual onto what you guys have written?
Well, first they send us candidates, and then we pick the best artists that we like. And we've been pretty lucky in that regard. They have some teams of artists that have been working together real well. Wouldn't you say, Kevin?
Yeah, and I think one of the real unique aspects of it is when we began the Dune graphic novel, and so Abrams and Boom Studios are 2 totally different companies, but we helped them work together when they designed like the uniforms and the ships and the Fremen and what the characters looked like. And it was just so cool to see this consistency from 2 different comic series from 2 different companies, and the ships pretty much looked the same and the uniforms looked the same, and that it was really remarkable that they would cooperate like that. And we've been really trying to bring like the novel publisher Tor and other people into the fold so that it's all one big Dune universe. And I've always read comics since I was a kid, and I love seeing the visual adaptation in addition to just the words.
I wish I had back the comics I sold at that Kool-Aid stand in 1958.
Yeah. Collector's editions.
Yeah, no, as far as following the Dune canon, which we work on the Dune canon a lot for all these projects that are out there. We're also helped by my nephew Byron Merritt and by my daughter Kim Herbert. We're not only help co-managing the company, and we're also have some creative input as far as the Dune canon goes there on that part. And then as far as the novels go, Kevin and I are hired as writers for hire, sort of like paladins in a sense. But I wear two hats. I'm a co-manager of my father's estate, but I also am a writer, so I can fire myself for sure.
Well, don't do that. I kind of need you around to help out with things, so don't do that.
All right, Kevin.
But it's just really exciting to kind of think back, because Dune was originally published in Analog Magazine, serialized in 1963, I think was the first part of it.
That's
and
correct.
Here we are. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So here we are in 2022. So wow, next year, man, there's just been so many years. And then right now, last year and this year will probably be the biggest years for Dune ever. And it's that many decades away.
Well, the novel was published in 1965 in book form, and it was rejected by like 20 publishers, including one publisher, a pretty well-known publisher in New York, who said, I may be making the mistake of my publishing career in rejecting Frank Herbert's Dune, but I just can't get past the first 100 pages without being confused and irritated. It takes quite a bit of focus to get into it. But fortunately, there was a man named Sterling Lanier who published a couple of science fiction novels. He was an editor for Chilton in Philadelphia, and Chilton published auto repair manuals, like these big Rambler manuals, and Ford and Chevy, and they wanted Sterling Lanier talk them into taking on something new, this massive novel Dune. And we're all glad they did. I mean, can you imagine if Frank Herbert's book had never been published? And that can happen, you know?
Wow. We got lucky. All the readers in the world got lucky.
Millions, yeah.
All the Dune fans are probably going to be absolutely like screaming over this interview, just hearing all the backstories and all the journey that led you guys to this.
Mary, we're in more than 40 languages for the Dune series right now. 43, 44, I think.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's amazing. It really is. You guys are just, it's incredible what you guys have accomplished so far just over the years. And it's crazy to think that it's been almost, 6 decades now since Dune was first published, and now here we are.
Yeah. Well, it was only Frank Herbert's second novel, too.
That's amazing.
Well, and the other thing, I mean, you could kind of hear us talking here, but Brian and I have now worked together for more than 2 decades, and we still like each other. I mean, we still talk, and we're still friends, and we have a great time together. So I think all the pieces fit together just right.
Absolutely.
Super glad to hear that. And I am curious though, because this kind of leads into that discussion we were just having with you guys working together for so long. Are there any major challenges that you guys have faced in between since you guys first met and now with publishing and with writing all these books? Like, what's the greatest lesson that you guys have learned or taken from working together?
Well, it's hard to do a book tour when you're having COVID across the world. So
oh
yeah. I think we figured out pretty early, though, 23, 24 years ago, what our strengths were. So we worked to those strengths. And we also have similar writing styles. So that was a challenge to make sure we could fit each of us into these projects. And we don't really argue. In fact, sometimes we've had the same idea or similar ideas simultaneously. And we used to use faxes. And one time I had this idea and Kevin had the idea at the same time. And I think I faxed the idea to him at a certain point and he was blown away. because he just had the idea himself.
Well, I was picking up the phone to call you about it, and you were faxing it to me or something like that, and so it worked. And I mean, so as far as our writing together, we're still writing together kind of the way we always did, but I mean the same techniques, although we've gotten a little bit more technologically adept. The first couple of books, we were like laying out index cards on the floor and handwriting them and arranging them around, and now of course we're emailing back and forth and messaging and sending files, and so that part is about the same. But publishing and bookselling is way different now than it was in 1998 when the first book came out. But it's just the industry. And I remember, I think Dune, the Butlerian Jihad, it came out as an ebook. I think it was one of the first ones that came out as an ebook. And the publisher was so excited that the Butlerian Jihad was their #1 best-selling ebook for 3 months in a row. And I asked, well, what does that mean? How many copies? He said, in 3 months, we've sold 300 copies. And they were all excited about it. Yeah, it's a little bit different now. So
that was the year 2000 approximately.
Yeah.
Or no, maybe a little after. Yeah.
That was before ebooks. I mean, for those of you who don't remember, and I'm going like back in the day, ebooks, people were talking about ebooks like they were talking about video telephones for years and years and years, and they just never took off. And it wasn't until closer to like 2008 that they really started to become a thing. So,
well, going back to 1985, I actually co-authored the last book that Frank Herbert wrote, Man of Two Worlds. And in those days, we sat at a typewriter, and Dad was very good about editing. And so he actually didn't want to retype the whole manuscript. So we had to keep the pages kind of intact. You could white out a little bit and tighten something up, but it was a different way of writing. He typed 1 million words a minute, and I sat there at his shoulder, and we threw the white out on the page. And things have changed a lot since then.
For the better. It's a whole lot easier to work together now than that.
It is.
I'm glad to hear
I
that.
can delete things, and Brian doesn't even know I've deleted them. So it's like much better.
Well, in those days, you would put a little insert page in, or half a page, or this or that. It was pretty messy, and you had things written all over the margins. So, yeah, Kevin and I have done that trick, what he just mentioned, where he deleted a chapter on me that I thought was the best thing I'd ever written. This is like 20 years. He deleted it. He sent back the manuscript, deleted my whole scene, and didn't say anything to me about it. So then when I got a hold of the thing, I caught him at it. So I looked at the scene, the chapter that I had written, and I figured out what was wrong with it, at least what I thought was wrong with it. I then did the same thing to him. I stuck it back in the book and didn't tell him. and it was published.
I let it through.
That's too funny.
Yeah.
And I know with you guys, and just kind of continuing on from that last question, I am a little bit curious. Since you have a lot of the manuscripts and you've had pretty much a lot of the past writings and everything from your dad, Frank, do you guys still do a lot of research when you're writing? Does it come out of like your imagination, or what is that process like now, kind of when you guys continue into writing the next of the Dune books?
Well, we have to make sure that we have the Dune canon right. So we'll not only use that concordance, but Kevin's really good about dipping into the novels that we wrote and making sure that we've tracked with that too. So we have to make sure that we don't contradict something that either Frank Herbert wrote or that we've already written and forgot about.
Well, and it might sound like a joke, but really we've written 20 some books in the Dune universe, plus we've each written a lot of our own books. And so trying to remember a detail from House Carino that we published in, I think, 2000 or something like that, that's a little bit hard. So before we do another one, I have all the audiobooks, and I like listen to Scott Brick, who's our great audiobook narrator, listen to them all over again and take notes just to kind of refresh my memory. But also one of the things, because we edit them before they get published, I might be remembering the way we wrote it in the 4th draft rather than the 7th draft, which is the one that got published. And it's kind of a challenge to keep all these really tiny details correct. But that's what, Brian and I we're trying to double check each other's work, and we lean on each other for expertise, because I'll ask him, do you remember if we did this or not? And we'll go back and forth and double check it. And it also helps that we have all of the final manuscripts online, so we can search for things. And
now we have found a few glitches. There was actually some in Dad's books, but they were so minor that we decided to leave them. It would be sacrilege to touch any of those. I think Kevin and I have made a couple of little glitches, and fortunately we've been able to fix them on the next novel and explain it.
Well, I mean, there's always different ways for you to think and explain things. And I got kind of amused at because we did a series called the Butlerian Jihad, which takes place 10,000 years before Dune. So it's all this ancient history of the origin of a bunch of things. And some fan wrote that, well, you guys got this one detail wrong that you didn't remember right. And I'm going, this is 10,000 years ago in history. We don't even agree on what happened in the news a week ago. And so it depends on which channel you watch. So there may well be different versions of history floating around, and those are the novels that we're working on. So,
well, it's fun to say that we when we do the fix in something, it's fun to say we had that in mind all along. That's not always true. It's true sometimes, but not always.
No, it's true. It's true, Brian. Don't tell them the secrets.
It's like sausage making here. You don't want all those details.
That's amazing. I mean, you guys, do you think it's easier after working together for 20 years, obviously, to co-author a book as opposed to you writing things alone and then having somebody separate edit it after you've written?
No, we do both. I had collaborated with Frank Herbert. I collaborated with my cousin Marie Landis on some horror novels. Kevin's done quite a few collaborations, so we enjoy it, but it's just part of who we are. It's an important part of who we are, but we do other things as well on our own.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And I know that with the rise of technology and smartphones and social media and things like that, has it made it a lot easier for you guys to just keep in touch? I know that, I think, Kevin, you mentioned that you're in Colorado. Brian, I think you said you're in Wisconsin. Is that right?
No,
Seattle.
Seattle, that's what it was. Right?
Well, we've been collaborating for a long time, but there were telephones invented when we started doing it. So it's and there were airplanes, and so I would fly out and visit with Brian before we started.
Oh, okay. Kevin, remember we used to mail the 5.5-inch floppy disk back and forth?
Well, we did, I think, for the first.
Yes, we did. And
Yeah.
and then we went to thumb drives, and then we went to emailing them back and forth.
So I mean, yeah, it has made things a whole lot easier, and both Brian and I have good social media presence on Twitter and Facebook and stuff, so we're able to keep up with the fans and spread the news. And there are so many different Dune Twitter accounts and websites and fan groups, and so it's much easier to spread the word about Sands of Dune, for instance, that's just coming out. So it certainly helps. And of course, the downside of it is that we seem to spend a whole lot of time on Facebook and Twitter and doing things that used to be developed as writing time, but we got it. We'll keep doing it.
Awesome. And for you guys, after looking through like some of the documents and everything and the concordance, like what do you find is the most complex part of the story? I want to see if you guys have maybe the same opinion on this, or if it's different between you guys, Kevin and Brian.
Well, we thought it was interesting in the notes, in the 1,000 pages of notes, that we found a scene basically written by Frank Herbert, and we were able to sand that down and put it into one of the novels as a chapter. maybe a little more than a chapter. But it was interesting to see what he had written, just scribbled in notes or typed up and didn't put in books. And there's still more material in there for us to look at. So it's pretty incredible to be able to have those notes and to know what this genius Frank Herbert was thinking. And his IQ was, oh man, 190. And if you look at a lot of very famous, really smart people, they're a lot lower than 190. Kevin and I are each 95, right? That
Yeah,
adds
I
up
think
to
that's where it goes. I don't know. I might be 95 and you're 94 or something like that, or the other way around. Wait, I couldn't do that math in my head. So for me, one of the cool things is in all the notes that we had found a bunch of Frank's original, like little chapter notes and outlines for an earlier version of Dune that he, probably in the late 50s, he was outlining something that he called Spice Planet. And it was just a kind of a rollicking action adventure story on a desert planet where two different families, the Atreides and the Harkonnens, kind of were on like a race to see who could get the most spice off of this desert planet while sandworms were attacking and the Emperor was going to win the prize to whoever did it most. And reading those outlines, it was clear like that would have been like a traditional late 1950s science fiction novel. And if Frank had written that, it probably wouldn't have gotten 20 rejection slips. It probably would have been published right away. And it would have, I'm sure, because he was a great writer, I'm sure it would have been well liked, but it would not have been Dune. And I can only imagine that he wrote this adventure story, but it kind of kept gnawing at the back of his mind, thinking that he could do something so much more and so much more complicated. And we're all lucky that he chose to write Dune, which was the unpublishable book at the time. But we all benefited from that because now we've got what I think is the best science fiction novel ever written.
Well, it's polyphonic, all these layers. And so you can read any one of those layers that you want to. You can read the adventure story, which, we have Dune fans 8 years old that read it as an adventure story, maybe a little more. But then as you go back into it, you can then see the women's issues are in there, and the women are very strong as you get into Frank Herbert's Dune books, later Dune books. And you see religion, you see politics, you see ecology. Ecology may be the most famous part of the novel. And in fact, the whole Earth catalog, back around 1970, when Dune was just picking up steam, they referred it to as an environmental handbook. So it's an environmental handbook with an adventure story. And Dad always said, you don't want to lecture to people. If you have a message, you don't want to lecture to people. You want to entertain them first. And so he entertained the heck out of us and then put all those important messages in there about other issues.
I mean, surely that was definitely the work of a man whose IQ is over 190. So
yes, maybe 191.
190.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you guys probably kind of one last question here. Do you guys have any advice that you would have told your younger self, or, what we would consider dad advice for any of our readers or listeners today?
Invest in Amazon.com.
I would say life, life's about taking chances. You want to take, you don't want to stand on the edge of a cliff. You want to take a chance where it's not going to be fatal, but you've got to take a chance to succeed. I think when Kevin and I took on this project 25 years ago, we were taking a huge chance because the online chatter was that we were not going to do very well. We couldn't possibly write anything in Frank Herbert's universe. So we took a huge chance. And when we showed up in Atlanta at Dragon Con at this big convention, there actually was a little chapbook published with Dune House Atreides, the actual cover on it. And Kevin and I are expecting to have tomatoes and things thrown at us. But we saw a lot of people lining up to come to our signing table, and we were a little nervous. And the first person that stepped up to me said, "Mr. Herbert, thank you for continuing this series." And I know Kevin's heard similar messages to him. So it's been gratifying. It's not to say we pleased everybody, but we took a chance, and I think it's worked out very well.
Yep. And if you want to be a writer, you have to be an unrealistic optimist from the very beginning anyway. And, this is not the job security kind of career, if that's what you're looking for. And I think that, I took a chance when I just sent a letter to Brian asking about that, but he could have said no, and then the last 25 years would have been a whole lot different for both of us. But you try it, and you do your best, and that's what life is, and that's what writing is, and creativity. And it has just been, even in my wildest dreams, Brian, when I was thinking of us writing either the last Dune book or a couple of things in the universe, I never thought we'd still be working our butts off 25 years later and still loving it and still doing more.
And I would tell my younger self to keep my day job. I did quit my day job at one point, and then I had to go. I was an insurance agent, and so I just let my license go, and then I started writing, and full time. This is back in the 80s, and I was publishing hardcover books once a year, and then gradually it became a paperback once a year. And I could see that it wasn't going the right direction at that time in the 1980s. So I got my day job back, became an insurance agent again, a broker. So yeah, keep your day job unless you have an IQ of 190.
Well, Frank had a day job for much of his career with the
he did
reporter, and
he did. Yes, he did.
Very, very sound advice, and definitely definitely great advice. I'm sure all the fans for Dune are just soaking everything in. They're going to be super happy to hear about this podcast and to get to know more about you guys and the entire process it took to really kind of get to where you guys are now. It's just, I've been having a great time listening to you guys, and I'm so honored to be able to interview you guys today. I'm really grateful that, you guys are giving us your time of day and letting us talk to you. We really appreciate it. That is all for the podcast today, book nerds. Thank you to our listeners so much for joining us as always. And a huge, huge thank you to Brian and Kevin for joining us. It's really been such a pleasure and such an honor to be able to talk to the both of them and to hear all the stories that they've shared. And before we wrap up today, Brian, Kevin, is there anything that you'd like to say to our listeners or any of our Dune fans today before we go?
Hi, this is Brian Herbert, and this is a little shout out for the great podcast site, JeanBookNerd. There is a lot more of interest in there, so tune into that. You will be elevated in your sophistication level.
This is Kevin J. Anderson. I want to give a shout out to JeanBookNerd.com podcast and website. You'll find lots of great nerdy goodness there, including an interview with me and Brian Herbert about all of our Dune projects. So check it out.